What would you do if your own brother stole your wedding fund and then looked you in the eye and said family money doesn't belong to just one person? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. But here's the thing about family, sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who underestimate you the most. My name is Isabella, and this is the story of how my brother Michael learned that lesson the hard way, when I cost him his $5 million business. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I never thought my own brother would look me straight in the eye and tell me that the $50,000 my grandmother left specifically for my wedding was somehow his money too. But that's exactly what happened, and it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would tear my family apart and ultimately cost him everything. My name is Isabella, and I'm 26 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in Chicago, and I've been engaged to my boyfriend Daniel for 2 years now. We're not wealthy by any means, but we're hardworking, honest people who believe in earning what we have. My older brother Michael, on the other hand, has always been the golden child of our family. At 32, he's the CEO of a tech startup, married to Amanda, whose family has more money than they know what to do with. And honestly, for most of my life, I was okay with living in his shadow because I loved my brother and I was proud of his success. 3 years ago, our grandmother Victoria passed away. She was the sweetest woman you could ever meet, and she always made sure both Michael and I knew how much she loved us. But even in death, she knew exactly who we were as people. When the will was read, Michael inherited her house, which was worth about $300,000, plus all of her jewelry collection. Me, I got $50,000 with very specific instructions that it was for my sweet Isabella's special day. She wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams, and she made sure I had the means to do it. At the time, I was so grateful I cried. Daniel and I had been talking about marriage, but we were worried about the cost of a wedding. Grandmother Victoria had given us the chance to have something beautiful without going into debt. Michael seemed happy for me too, giving me a big hug at the lawyer's office and saying how proud grandmother would be to see me walk down the aisle. But looking back now, I think that's when the problems really started. It began subtly at family dinners. Michael would make little comments about my engagement ring, how it was modest compared to Amanda's massive diamond. He'd say things like when Amanda and I got married, we spared no expense because family reputation matters, you know. Our parents would laugh along and Dad would pat Michael on the back, saying how smart he was with money and business. Meanwhile, whenever I tried to share something about my work or my wedding plans, the conversation would somehow always circle back to Michael's latest business achievement. Then came the condescending advice. About 6 months after grandmother passed away, Michael started offering to help with my wedding planning. You know, Izzy, he'd say with that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl, wedding planning is really complicated. Maybe you should let someone with actual business experience handle the finances. When I politely declined, saying Daniel and I had everything under control, I caught a flash of irritation across his face that he quickly covered with a smile. The boundary testing got worse at every family gathering. Michael would casually ask about my wedding budget, making comments about how the venue I'd chosen was quaint and budget-friendly in a way that made it sound cheap and embarrassing. He'd suggest I should ask him for money instead of using grandmother's old savings, as if the inheritance she'd specifically left for me was somehow outdated or insufficient. But the worst part was how he started manipulating our parents. I'd overhear him telling Mom and Dad that he was worried about Izzy being financially irresponsible with grandmother's gift. He'd shake his head sadly and say things like, I just think grandmother would want the money to be used wisely, you know. Before long, my parents were questioning my choices too. Mom would call and ask if I was sure about spending so much on flowers, or if I really needed a DJ when someone's cousin could probably do it for free. Our family group chat became Michael's personal platform for subtle criticism. He'd share articles about budget wedding tips or stories about couples who went into debt for their weddings. The message was clear: I was being irresponsible, and he was the responsible one looking out for the family's best interests. I started doubting myself. Maybe my dress was too expensive. Maybe the catering was over the top. Daniel would find me stressed out after these family interactions, checking and rechecking our wedding budget spreadsheet, making sure we weren't being foolish with the money grandmother had left us. You're overthinking this, David would say. Your grandmother left that money for your wedding because she wanted you to be happy. But I'd make excuses for Michael's behavior. He just cares about the family's image, I'd tell Daniel. He doesn't want us to look bad. The gaslighting intensified as my wedding date approached. Michael started joking about me being financially naive at family dinners, while Amanda would chime in with backhanded compliments about my simple tastes and how refreshing it was to see someone planning such a down-to-earth wedding. Meanwhile, every conversation somehow became about Michael's business success, his new office, his latest client, his expensive car. My achievements at work were dismissed with a pat on the head and a "that's nice, dear," while Michael's every move was treated like front-page news. I found myself checking my wedding savings account more and more frequently, not because I was worried about the money, but because seeing that balance gave me some sense of security. At least I knew grandmother's gift was safe, waiting there for the day Daniel and I would finally tie the knot. If only I had known that while I was doubting myself and making excuses for my brother's increasingly toxic behavior, he was already planning something that would shatter not just my dreams, but my trust in family forever. 2 weeks before my wedding, I sat at my laptop planning to make the final vendor payments. Daniel was at work, and I was excited to finally see all our planning come together. I logged into my wedding savings account with that familiar sense of security, ready to transfer money to our photographer and florist. But when the page loaded, I felt my heart stop. The balance read $3,247.32. I stared at the screen, convinced there had to be some mistake. I refreshed the page 3 times, logged out and back in, even cleared my browser cache thinking it was some kind of technical glitch. But the number didn't change. $50,000 had somehow become $3,000. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the transaction history. What I saw made me physically sick. Systematic withdrawals over the past 6 months, each one for thousands of dollars. $8,000 here, $12,000 there, sometimes 2 withdrawals in the same week. And every single one had been authorized and transferred to an account I recognized, Michael's business account. I called the bank immediately, my voice barely steady enough to get through the security questions. The customer service representative confirmed what I was seeing. All the withdrawals had been made using proper authorization, with someone who had access to my account information. That's when I remembered, Michael had handled all of grandmother's financial paperwork as the executor of her estate. Somehow he'd used that access to get into my account. When Daniel came home that evening, he found me sitting on our couch in complete shock, bank statements scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. "Isabella, what's wrong?" he asked, and I just handed him the papers. I watched his face go from confusion to horror to pure rage. "He stole your wedding money." Daniel's voice was barely controlled. "All of it." I called Michael that night, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. "Michael, I need you to explain something to me. My wedding account is missing $47,000, and the bank says it went to you." There was a long pause before he answered, and when he did, his voice had that same casual tone he used when discussing the weather. "What are you talking about, Izzy? I never touched your money." "Michael, I have bank statements. Every withdrawal went directly to your business account. How do you explain that?" Another pause, then a sigh like I was bothering him with something trivial. "Look, there must be some kind of mistake. Maybe there's been some mix-up with the accounts. I'll look into it." But I wasn't backing down this time. "There's no mix-up, Michael. I need that money back. My wedding is in 2 weeks. "Fine," he said, his voice getting sharp. "Let's meet tomorrow at Mom and Dad's house and sort this whole thing out." The next evening, I walked into my parents' living room carrying a folder of bank statements, with Daniel right beside me for support. Michael was already there with Amanda, both of them looking perfectly calm and composed. My parents were sitting on the couch, and I could tell from their expressions that Michael had already been talking to them. I put the bank statements on the coffee table. Michael took $47,000 from my wedding account over the past 6 months. I have documentation of every transaction. Michael didn't even look at the papers. Instead, he turned to our parents with this sad, concerned expression. "Mom, Dad, I'm worried about Izzy. She's been really stressed about the wedding, and now she's making these wild accusations. Remember when she was in college and she was convinced her roommate stole her textbooks? It turned out she'd just misplaced them." I felt my face burn with humiliation. "This isn't about misplaced textbooks, Michael. This is about bank records. Look at the statements." But my mother was already shaking her head. "Isabella, honey, your brother wouldn't steal from you. He's built a successful business. Why would he need your money?" "Because the statements prove he took it," I said, my voice rising in desperation. That's when Michael's whole demeanor changed. He sat back in his chair with this smug expression and said, "Okay, fine. Yes, I borrowed the money. My business had a temporary cash flow issue, and I needed a short-term loan. I was going to pay it back before your wedding." The casualness of his admission hit me like a slap. "Borrowed? You didn't ask me, you just took it." "Oh, come on, Izzy. Family money should help family, right? It's not like the money disappeared forever." My father nodded along. "Isabella, your brother has always been responsible with money. If he says he was going to pay it back, then he was going to pay it back." Amanda chimed in with her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her wine glass. "Honestly, Isabella, Michael's business supports this whole family. Maybe you should show some gratitude instead of throwing around accusations." I felt like I was losing my mind. Gratitude? He stole my wedding money. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Actually, Izzy, I have a promissory note right here that you signed, agreeing to loan me the money." He handed it to my father, who looked it over and nodded approvingly. I stared at the paper in disbelief. It was completely fabricated, but it looked official enough to fool my parents. "I never signed that. I never agreed to any loan." "You're being dramatic," Izzy, Michael said with that infuriating calm voice. "Look, I'll tell you what. As a gesture of goodwill, I'll pay you back $25,000. That should be more than enough for your little wedding." Little wedding? I felt tears of rage burning my eyes. "And 25,000? You took 47. My mother reached over and patted my hand condescendingly. "Isabella, your brother is being very generous. Maybe you should accept his offer and stop causing problems for the family." I looked around the room at these people who were supposed to love and protect me, and I realized they had already made their choice. They would always choose Michael. They would always believe his lies over my truth. I stood up, Daniel immediately beside me. "Fine. Keep the money, Michael. Keep all of it. But don't expect me at family dinners anymore. Don't expect me to pretend we're one big happy family." Michael actually smiled as I headed for the door. "Izzy, you'll get over this. Family is family." That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel offered to use his savings for our wedding, but that wasn't the point anymore. As I lay in bed, something Michael had said kept bothering me. He'd claimed his business had cash flow problems, but just last month I'd seen him post on social media about his company's expansion and new office space. Something didn't add up. So I decided to find out exactly what my brother had really been doing with my grandmother's gift. And what I discovered would destroy his life completely. I spent the next 3 days using every research skill I'd learned in marketing to investigate my brother's business. What I found made my blood run cold, but also gave me the most satisfying sense of justice I'd ever felt. Michael's company had actually secured $5 million in investor funding 8 months ago. I found the press releases, the business filings, everything. His claims about cash flow problems were complete lies. But as I dug deeper into public records and cross-referenced dates, a disturbing pattern emerged. The timing of his withdrawals from my account perfectly aligned with major sporting events: the Super Bowl, March Madness, the World Series. My brother wasn't just a thief. He was a gambling addict who had been embezzling investor money to fund his addiction. My $50,000 was just pocket change compared to what he'd really stolen. I traced bank transfers, business expenditures, and found discrepancies totaling over $800,000. Michael had been falsifying financial reports to his investors while systematically draining their money to feed his gambling habit. This wasn't just theft anymore, this was federal securities fraud. Daniel helped me organize everything into a comprehensive evidence package. We had bank transfers, business filings, social media posts showing Michael's expensive purchases during the period he claimed to have cash flow problems, and a detailed timeline proving systematic embezzlement. I made an anonymous call to the investment firm, speaking to their fraud department. "I have evidence that one of your portfolio companies is embezzling investor funds," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm sending you documentation that shows systematic fraud over the past year." Within 48 hours, the investment firm launched a formal investigation. Within a week, the FBI was involved. Michael's company accounts were frozen, and suddenly the local business news was running stories about a tech CEO under federal investigation for securities fraud. That's when my phone started ringing. "Isabella, did you do something?" Michael's voice was panicked, desperate. Gone was the smug confidence from our family meeting. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael," I said calmly. "What's wrong?" "The FBI is investigating my company." They're saying someone tipped them off about financial irregularities. They've frozen all my accounts. That sounds serious, I replied, enjoying every second of his panic. Maybe you should call a lawyer. Isabella, please, if you know anything about this, you have to help me. This is going to destroy everything. Michael, I said, my voice getting cold. I learned from the best that family money should help family, right? But I guess that only works one way. The local news picked up the story within days. Local tech CEO under FBI investigation for investor fraud. The details that emerged painted a picture of systematic gambling addiction and embezzlement that went back over a year. Michael's company lost every major client within a week. Amanda's wealthy family immediately cut off all financial support, and she filed for divorce before the week was over. My parents called, crying, Isabella, we're so sorry. We found the real bank records. We should have believed you. But their apologies felt hollow after years of choosing Michael over everyone else. The final confrontation happened at my parents' house again, but this time Michael looked broken. His perfectly styled hair was messy, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and his hands were shaking. You destroyed our family, he said, looking at me with pure hatred. No, Michael, I replied calmly. I just stopped pretending your destruction was normal. You want to know something interesting? I found evidence that you've been stealing from grandmother's estate too. Should I share that with the prosecutors? He crumbled then, admitting everything. The gambling addiction, the embezzlement, even stealing from our grandmother's jewelry collection to pay off debts. Our parents sat in stunned silence as their golden child revealed himself to be nothing more than a common criminal. The consequences came swift and brutal. Michael faced 10 to 15 years in federal prison and had to pay over $2 million in restitution to investors. His company was declared bankrupt. Amanda took full custody of their children and moved back to her parents' estate. My parents had to mortgage their house to pay for Michael's legal fees, only to watch him plead guilty anyway. But here's the beautiful irony: as part of the restitution process, the investors' legal team recovered my $50,000 plus interest. I got every penny back, while Michael lost everything. My wedding went ahead as planned. It was smaller than originally intended, but it was perfect. My parents attended, genuinely apologetic and trying to rebuild our relationship. The extended family, once they learned the truth, rallied around me with support I'd never felt before. Even some of Michael's former business associates reached out to apologize for not seeing through his lies sooner. Michael sent me a letter from prison 3 months later, admitting to everything and begging for forgiveness. I read it once, then tore it up without showing it to anyone. Some people have to lose everything to learn what really matters, but by then it's too late. I learned something important through all of this. I spent years making excuses for toxic behavior, doubting myself, and accepting treatment I never should have tolerated. I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But sometimes being family means protecting each other from each other, even if that means exposing the truth that tears everything apart. Looking back now, married to Daniel and finally free from Michael's manipulation, I realized that my family thought I was the weak one. They thought I was the one who would always back down, always accept whatever scraps they threw my way. Turns out, I was just the one who hadn't had enough yet. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and feel free to share your story or opinions in the comments.